All right, so hopefully the transcription works, but thank you guys for coming out to this workshop. This is the first workshop of Catalyst 2021. We're really grateful to have Francesco from Sketch kind of walk us through how best to use Sketch as well as productivity tips. So Francesco can take it away.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for taking the time to join this workshop today. My name is Francesco. I'm in New York City, and I'm a design advocate for Sketch. And you might be familiar or not with Sketch. I'd love to know when we post the question in the chat if you've ever used Sketch before, and if you have used Sketch, if you ever created prototypes. Today, I'll show you in about 45 minutes how to create a prototype, very simple prototype, but also how to be productive and how to watch out for things that will make your design experience much better. Not only in Sketch, but in general with any design tool. I love to talk about prototyping as one of the best ways to design, if you will, because designing is all about iterate. And you can obviously start designing on paper. That's great, and it's good to get the gist of an idea. But nowadays, tools allow you to go a lot faster. And the more you get to learn tools and be productive with them, the more effective you will be in the iterations. If you've done UX before, or even just UI design, or in general anything, you know that you don't get it right the first time. The moment you start showing to people, that's when you start getting feedback. And even before that, though, it's important for yourself to be able to appreciate it with what you're doing is getting closer to the idea you want to represent. That's very abstract, maybe. I'll start sharing my screen, and all right, so we can start getting into it. Okay. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yep, looks good.
Good. Okay, perfect. And I'll put you up here. Okay. So now that doesn't overlap with my UI. Perfect. So for those that are not familiar with it, we're looking at Sketch in Big Sur. The UI, if you downloaded Sketch or you're still in a previous version of the Mac OS, looks slightly different in terms of colors, etc. But the structure is pretty much the same. You have the pages here on the left side. You'll see the layer list, which is how we organize the elements within Sketch. And you'll see at the top the toolbar. That's common to everything. On the right, to all the versions of Sketch. And I'm going a little fast because I know this is being recorded. So hopefully you'll get to watch it again. You don't have to try to do everything as we go along. It's tricky to do it on your laptop while you're also watching on a screen, somebody else's screen. So feel free to just take notes if you want, try things out, but don't expect it to go as fast as I do. In general, in Sketch, you can insert elements from up here. So shapes, like rectangles, etc. You can also insert text, images, and even artboards. This is called the canvas, and on the canvas you usually organize artboards. And there's usually one artboard, and you press A to introduce artboards to insert artboards with a specific preset. You have a bunch of presets here today because I want to show you how to create a mobile prototype. So that's what we're going to focus on. But the same goes for any kind of website or other kind of prototype. So you see here we have a variety of different presets. It's important for prototyping that you start from these presets because it will give you some free features if you do start from the presets. So in this case, I have an iPhone 11 Pro, so I'm going to start from that one. And so it's fairly vertical compared to others. If you're testing this thing yourself, feel free to choose the size of the device you want to prototype on. And just to give you an idea, I'll show you, this is also a prototype I'll share with you. It's a wonderful cat wars. I love cats. I don't love wars, but I love cats and movies. So I like to show this as many. I try to keep it all like, this is less about like UI perfection, is more about getting the gist of how a prototype, this is a very simple prototype. With Control F, I can turn on the connections, but you can see even just a few screens can have a lot of connections. So it's good to turn it on and off and only look at it when you really need to work on those connections. But I'll show you how to create these connections. And just so everybody gets the gist of what you can do in Sketch, I can just, for example, launch the prototype. I can even go in full screen if I want to. And you can see I can scroll. There's some fixed parts. I can click here to see the side panel. This year we'll be improving this, so you'll also be able to create transitions in this panel. But one important thing I wanted to say about prototyping. Prototyping should be really the easiest thing you do. The hardest thing should be about making sure whatever workflow you're coming up with, whatever idea, that's the part where you really need to research a lot. Doesn't mean that prototyping is easy, but comes up, it only makes sense to do it once you're ready to figure out the core idea. Now, you might have heard of different levels of fidelity of prototyping. And there's sort of slow level prototyping that you can do even just for yourself with like blocks of content that are even grayed out. And that's okay for internal purpose and for yourself, just to understand the structure of something. But it's rarely good enough to present to a client that is not a designer, or to present to put in front of users. In that case, you're not going to get a lot of valuable feedback if there's too much, basically if the fidelity is too low. And the fidelity can be low not only at the design level, but also at the content level. If you put lorem ipsum everywhere in your designs, or images that don't convey what the goal is, even here, obviously it's not super polished at all, but we know what you're talking about, right? We're looking at images of cats, and you kind of get that this call to action is about rating a movie. So if I click on it, and now I can choose to rate it. But if I not put the real content there, like a fake title here, or I use an image that wasn't relevant, I would be giving away the wrong message to the end user is trying to test it. The other one is context. Whenever possible, try to put the thing you're showing to your users on the device. And in Sketch, for example, you can see I just downloaded the Mirror app. I'll send you a link afterwards. But basically, if you search Mirror Sketch in cloud on the Apple Store, you'll be able to download an app that allows you to preview the prototypes directly in allows you to view the prototypes directly on the phone, so you can play with them, and they're full screen, and it gives you right away an idea if you are creating, for example, the buttons at the right size. One of the biggest mistakes for somebody designing a mobile UI right away is to try to cram a ton of stuff in a small space. And use your finger, because your finger usually, at least mine's are gigantic. Make sure that there's no elements that are too close to each other. And sometimes it might look almost horsey in some situations, but make sure that at least the main actions are easy to tap. The reason I'm saying that is because if your UI is not easy to use, it will give a subliminal message to the end user that your app is not easy to use. You might have heard this, and your system and your service, your product is hard to use in general. So don't make it harder for users to find the things they want to do. Don't make it hard by having tiny controls. Sometimes it looks prettier, but it doesn't have, don't focus on that. That's not the core. So here you can see I can click through. One thing you cannot do at the moment in Sketch, you cannot play videos. It's all about, in Sketch at the moment, it's great to creating click-throughs in a really fast way. It probably would take me 5 minutes to create all this prototype in terms of connecting all the connections I showed you before. And if I press escape here, I can just go back. You can keep this preview always on the side if you want, and at the same time test it on your phone. I could be testing also what it looks like on an iPad if I wanted to. And I can jump to different screens. Now, this is nice here because if you could have a prototype on multiple pages. Doesn't have to be on just one page. If you're doing something for a hackathon, probably you'll be able to have everything on canvas. But the moment your product evolves, might have hundreds of screens. And the other thing to consider is if at some point you have to do micro interactions, if you really need to test that, you rarely test the micro interactions though at the very beginning. You usually have a pretty solid idea of the overall workflow. That's when you can jump in other tools. They're more specific to do micro interactions. You can add sound, you can add videos and things like that. Okay, so this is just the gist of what you can do with Sketch. You can always click here and say view on cloud. And this is where basically we introduced live collaboration in Sketch, and let's see if you, but also we have the ability to store your files. If you want, you can store them locally, or you can store them publicly. If you're doing this hackathon this weekend, you can create a team account for free, and then at least you have a free trial. But that will allow you to live collaborate with others if you want to do so. And as you can see, I have the prototypes at the top. The reason because I can have multiple prototypes for the same within the same document, and you can see the experience is the same. If you wanted to, you could click here on. You can scan this with your phone and see it directly on your phone, direct, right? Same thing. You could obviously copy this URL and do it that way. I'll copy this and put it in my document, just in case somebody wants to see it later. And I'll share this document with you, so you'll be able to also see how to do this. Now I'll jump back into showing you how to build something really, really quick. And then I'll give you some other productivity tools. Usually I like to start from what's called block framing, where you define the areas of your screen. I'll call it screen because most of the things we're doing these days, they're interactive, are on screens, but obviously UI design is one thing, is focus on visual things. UX design goes beyond that. It goes also, you might have heard about UX writers. They can also just write experiences. They don't have to be visual. If you're working on Alexa or Siri, there's not a lot of visual there, right? Now, in this case, I just pressed R and create a rectangle. Sketch is pretty good at snapping things to the edges, so we will make it really easy to do so. Here, you can enter values, so if I want to make that 100%. The reason why it's important to do this is, meaning to see things on your device, is that you can see phones with notches give the impression that you have a lot more space than you actually do. So when you're looking at the design itself here, it might look like you have a gigantic header. In practice, half of it, some of it will be covered by the notch. So you want to make sure, and that's not really usable within the app. So you want to make sure that you're looking at the preview on your phone. And to me, putting the screens on the device is really the very first version of a prototype, if you type of prototype. There's also paper prototypes, you might have heard of those. Nowadays, they're used only to just get the gist of it, but the lay of the land of what you're trying to build, they're used more for flows than actual prototypes. So now, let's say I'm putting here a header, and then I'm pressing Option and Shift so I can duplicate it and keeping it in a vertical duplication. If I press Option, I'm scaling from the middle, okay? And so in this case, I'm just creating something very simple. I'm creating a header and then some cards that will have content. I'm doing this just because it's probably the simplest type of app. You've seen a million of those where you have, a list view, and then you're going into a detail view where you see more information about that specific things you tap. So here I could decide to just stretch this and make it taller, totally fine. I could decide though to, if you are into math, and I'm talking about basic math here, not everybody loves it, right? But you can do things like, okay, here, obviously I want to position that at 120 pixels. Now it's actually too tight so I can add 16 pixels. Okay, so now you see that shifted down and just did an addition. I could do also divisions. I could do, so divided by 2 if I wanted something to be half the width or half the height. But you can also do percentages. So let's say if I wanted to do 100% here, and from the center with C, that would make that object span the full width of the artboard, and also expand the size from C, from the center. I could have done also something like this. Let's say 300 from the top is the natural behavior, but let's say you want to force it. If I did it from the bottom, now you'll see the box will expand vertically, but going up. Okay, so I can control that. This is not what I want to do. I can just position out these two, and I can choose once you select 2 elements, you can choose the exact spacing between 2 elements. But let's say 24, and then press hide. So now that will position 2 objects 24 pixels from each other. Pressing Option, you can always hover other objects and get the distances. This is not for pixel perfection. I'm just giving you a sense of, but having rhythm in your design will help people understand what are the things that are related and the things instead are breaking intentionally the pattern that you established. So that's something important to keep in mind. So here, if I want to do 375 minus, I want 24, so let's say 12 pixels on either side. In the margin, I can just do minus 24 and put C. So we'll do it from the middle. Okay, lots of math. The other things that work there are percentages, as I said before. And I find it really, really handy. Now, one thing you can do here is usually, you're going to have a screen that probably will have, especially in a situation where you have a list, you'll have more content and that will have to be able to scroll. So in Sketch, this is the important thing to keep in mind. You see how here it says 375 by 812. If I were just to, the moment I stretch it vertically, that becomes resized right here, right? That resize means that now Sketch understands that the content in here will actually be scrolling with the original container that was 812 pixel high. And so if there's taller, there's more content will actually auto scroll. So the moment I do this, and then I'm just going to fix the navigation so you see the difference. If I do Command P, then I can see not only the top is fixed, but also the bottom is scrolling. And it's scrolling just because it's taller than the actual content, than the initial viewport of the device. This is something that is really important because when people miss it, they'll find that now all of a sudden the prototype is not scrolling and just seeing everything is fitting into that viewport, and you're going to go nuts if you're like spending a lot of time trying to figure out why it's not doing that. We could do a better job at indicating that, but that's definitely a great tip. So the other thing you want to do in any design tool is to name things correctly. That's not only for yourself, because you can find things later much easier, but also if you're collaborating with others. And nowadays, live collaboration, meaning working with others on the same document, will make it, exposes your flaws, if you will, your disorganizations even more. So you want to be able to name things really quickly. The first thing I'm going to do, I could just save to Workspace here. Workspace is the cloud space I showed before, but I'm going to show you just doing Command S. Then you get this modal and ask you where you want to save it. You can totally still save it locally, and even if you lose internet connection, you can keep working. Or you can save to cloud, and in this case, even with cloud, you can keep working if you already have the document open. So that's a big advantage. I'm going to say mobile, very original name, but I'm going to save it here and under sample files. Okay, hit save. As you can see, there's also an option for embedding fonts. If you're using some custom fonts, I recommend that you actually include them. So other designers will not have to wonder about where those fonts are coming from, that maybe you use a special font. And they'll be able to see your designs the same way. And also in cloud will render correctly because the fonts will be available. In this case, I have no fonts here, so I don't have to do anything. So I hit save. So the moment I hit save, the file has been uploaded to cloud, and you can see it says update created. So, and also my avatar, this is the thing it's telling me that now I'm working off of cloud, but I have a cached copy. So anytime I could lose connection, I'll still be able to work. If I were to do view on cloud, I'll be able to go see the content. Now there's not much, so I'm not gonna do that. One thing that is really important I was saying is to rename things correctly. So in this case, I'm gonna do Command R. You could also double click on the name here and call it start. Then I'm going to select this element here and call it header. Header, and then here, card. I'll keep one other thing that is really important in Sketch is as I said, we're starting creating the containers for the areas that you want to then fill out later. And you can evolve these things. You might have heard that in Sketch, we have a concept called of symbols. Symbols allow you to repeat content without actually having to reuse elements of your design without having to go and change that element on every screen. So symbols are a type of component. If you heard about design systems, that is a big thing. It's been a big thing for a few years now. But is core element of a design system. So anything that you can set once and repeat, like text styles, layer styles, colors, and symbols, are at the core of a design system. Will not. I can send you a video afterwards about the idea of design systems that we put together with another design advocate. But today I'm going to focus on the gist here. So I can duplicate this, click and make grid. As you can see, now automatically I get 4 elements. If I drag it here like this and then down, I can keep creating. Let's say I'll do 4. Okay. So now I have 4 cards. I'm going to just stretch this down. So now I have a little extra space. If I were to click preview again, now you can see I have these 4 pieces of content. And obviously everything is updating on my phone. Now, so we have a starting point. I'm going to get, because we don't have a ton of time, I'm really rushing. I want to make sure I show you at least the core aspects of a sketch. The thing we're going to do is to create a symbol. So in this case, let's say I've decided the spacing between the elements here is correct. I selected this 4. I want to group them. It's always good to give containers to the types of content, at least, or functional items you're creating, so that they're all, it's obvious to all, everybody else, or even a developer needs to build it, how to structure things. Of course, the developer will have an opinion about this, but it's good for you to think also in this way. So now again, Command R, I'm going to call it cards. Cards. I'm going to create a symbol here already, and that can be done this way. I'm going to call it header. I'm not going to make a symbol of all the cards at once. You could at some point if that's what you need to accomplish, like having a repeated, a reusable set of items. But at the moment, I'm going to create just an element for this card. And you'll see I can change the rounded corners. Let's say make a very generous one. And I'm going now to create a card for that. Sorry, a symbol for that. I'm going to call it card. You saw that there's a bottom left when I create a symbol, there was something that says send to symbols page. And the moment you create symbols, they're sent all here. So I can see them all grouped in one page. This is the default behavior in Sketch, but you can organize them the way you want. And one thing I really invite you to do in the very beginning is not copy these and paste them elsewhere, actually just drag them into the main page, especially when you're working on something very simple, because you can see immediately the effects of the changes I make here will be visible everywhere you're using that symbol. So let's say now we want this basic card here. I'm going to add, let's say, an image. You can insert images for sure, just do like this, but a better use, images can be, let's say, a little stiff inside Sketch. If you use a layer instead, I just put it, let me make this a little transparent. I press 2 to make that layer transparent. So you see now transparency is 20%. I can select this item and I want to apply, I can change the colors here, and you can create a color variable, which is a color you can reuse in styles and text styles you're using later. I'll call it primary here really quick. But then you can also change to gradients, different kinds. The one I wanted to show you is the one about images. Here I can actually insert an image, and I could just drag an image from let's say, I could go find some cats online and drag them here. You can also collect your images in a folder and then just use them. But at least you know that everybody's on your team is using the same images. You can also create a library of images that others will be able to reuse. For today, we're going to leave it at this. But you can click this one. And for example, a plugin that comes with Sketch is by Unsplash. So I could decide to search for a specific type of photo. And let's say cats. And that will download the photo and insert it. That doesn't look like a cat to me, but let's see. So I'm going to try another cat. Okay, these are definitely cats. So the point here, though, is by using Unsplash, we're starting to get content that is realistic content, right? So never do something like using user-generated content somewhere where you are going to, or actually use stock photography that is really polished when you're actually going to use user-generated content. We'll give you a completely different look, and the feedback will be very different than what. So if you really need to want to use generated content, find user-generated content online that resembles what you're trying to do. Same thing for text. If here I were to put like pressing T, I can just say, okay, title here. Intentionally, I'm keeping it generic because initially I want to understand the structure of what I'm doing. And I can change the alignments, of course, from the left side. I can make it a little wider if I want to. Now it's intentionally big. Let me make it a little smaller, 24. It's always good to, most of the cases, it's also good to set a line height. For today, I'm going to do just 36, which is the generous one. And I could go on and add other details to this. So just Option and Shift and dragging, or I could do Command D to duplicate something. You can duplicate anything, any layer, any artboard. If you were to do an artboard, we'll actually duplicate it. If I were to do Command D here, we'll just create another artboard on the side. If you do Command 1, you go and see the whole screen, all the artboards. If you do select something, you do Command 2, we'll focus on that element. If it's an element like a card like that, if I do Command 2, we'll zoom right in. This is really important because otherwise you're spending a lot of time moving around. Pressing spacebar allows you to pan really quick. Okay. So in this case, you see that because if I make changes to this text here, I'm going to make it, let's say, darker and pretend that that's not a title, but that's going to be the author. So I'm going to press Enter, author, here. I'm going to make it much smaller. 12. And this color here, intentionally, I'm going to choose the color variable already created, so that now if I were to change that color, anywhere it's applied will be reused everywhere. And I can update it once and I'll update it everywhere. So let's say if you want to keep all your text consistent, even if it's different sizes of text, but you want the same color, you can apply that. So in this case, I'm also creating a color variable here. There's a difference. Clicking here on the right side will let you choose among the already defined colors. If instead you click here, you can actually create a color variable. I'm going to make it a little darker, create color, and call it text. Okay, so you see I now have 2 color variables. You can always go browse with Control-2 or clicking here. You can go see the things you already created. This is called the components browser, and we'll make it easy to, okay, I already see what you have in your catalog. You can see that I've not created text styles yet, and or layer styles, but I created some colors. So you can always make the change from here. And if I wanted to make that change, let's say make it a little darker, a lot darker, make it a little darker. When I go back, now you'll see that wherever I used the color, and let me choose a better color. It was made a little, so I'll choose something completely different. Wherever I actually use that color and use the variable, the things have changed. So the text has changed everywhere. But because I not applied it here, that will not have changed. So now I want this around the corners to be everywhere like that. So I'm going to Control-click, choose mask, and now I have anything you find in Sketch, you can probably Control-click on it and see the options that are available to you. A lot of times it's the fastest way to do things. Although actually the fastest way is to learn some of the shortcuts. As I mentioned, R for rectangle and T, because 99% of the UI design is building boxes and then adding labels. So those are the key you want to once you want to learn. So, and never you want to have things called rectangle. In this case, I'm going to call it image. And name, and let's say title here. Okay. Now, if I want to replace all the elements already placed here, I can just select them, Control-click, and do replace, document, card. So now I have the same card everywhere. And if I make changes, that means that the same change reflects everywhere. So start with symbols in the very beginning too. Like, don't be shy and like, oh, but the moment you feel like you're going to duplicate a component, turn it into a style of some kind or into a symbol. And styles work for text and also for shapes. So you're gonna, like, whenever you hit enter, you're gonna go and edit that thing So it can be a text layer or it can be a symbol. So here I can actually apply the color variable primary, and I can also call it let's say header style for now. There's a distinction if you're into design systems and heard of them. There's or the concept of tokens. There's choice tokens or option tokens, which are the very basic idea. Let's say a color per se with a color value, and then there's the concept of decision token. The decision token is where you decide to give a name that has meaning so that everybody else on the team knows exactly what you want, what you meant by. So let's say if I were to call this header background or card background and also associated a state with it, let's say active, everybody on my team would know that when they need to design a card, they would be using that specific style. And if it were active, let's say, or hover, they would know that that's the state. And a developer would also, if I've shared a convention with them, they also would know how to develop this thing really fast. So that's why it's really important to define names that that make sense for everybody on the team. So here, let me add this header here. I'm going to add quick a logo, pretend that that's the logo here, and let's pretend that there's a menu icon on the right side. If you're using SF Symbols app from Apple, I highly recommend it, especially on a hackathon. You do not want to spend time coming up with the right icon or consistency between icons, unless it's a concept that nobody else has ever come up with. But that's not during the hackathon you're going to do that. So this app is free. It's called SF Symbols. You can find anything here that you want. Pretty much, that is at least part of the Apple ecosystem. So most of the time, if I wanted, let's say, a close button, X, let's say, yep. I apologize. I'm a little fried on a Friday afternoon. You can find pretty much any icon I said, okay? But let's say you can see all the share icons, and you can always start from one of these and then modify it. So let's say now I want a menu. So let's say this is not technically a menu icon, right? But I can just drag it in. Will come in as text. As you can see, this actually came through as text. Text this layer. I can actually edit it because that's a long story, but that's how the SF symbols work. And I can do Command Shift. Oh, sorry, Option was not working there. Let's do here. Convert to outlines, right? So now, because I want to be able to modify that. Whenever you see I'm clicking around and I'm by mistake I selected the background, you can decide to do Command Shift L to lock it. So now that won't move anymore. And here I can now drag it on top of this. I can make it white. Okay, but this is still vector. Although let's say broke it, I could decide to make it a icon like this. So now like I did for other elements, as I said, this is a group of, I could just click here and expand it. Like you can also just press enter and then we'll expand that group. If you were a group of things, I'll show you in a sec, you can also expand those. And if I were to select one of these items, then I can tap, I can tap the tab icon, is sorry, key. It makes it, you see, cycling through the points. If I selected this object here instead, and tab will cycle through this thing. It's really important to learn to use shortcuts because so you can be focused on the design and not having to find all these menus everywhere. Now, in the very beginning, you'll have to learn that. But so let's say now I'm selecting these elements. Just want to remove the things I don't need. Just gonna select these. And now I have my classic hamburger icon. Not saying that hamburger icons per se are always the most usable. Different products might, if your user already have used that that menu icon elsewhere, they might understand it. So do your research and understand what your context is. Command K allows me to scale something and keep it. So let's say now we created this, and you can always select two elements like this and decide to center from on each other. Okay, this is really brutal. So, but definitely not my best design. ever. But so you can see, let's pretend this is my logo here and made it bigger, even if nobody asked. Okay, so here I'm gonna combine these two. The reason why I'm gonna make a button for this menu, icons, menu, and here I'm gonna call it just logo. The reason is because if I were to reuse these elements later on, let's say I have to put a logo in a footer, I would just be able to replace it once and I'm updated everywhere. Same thing for the menu if for whatever reason I wanted to display separately from this header. Technically, at this point, I don't have to make it like that. And one thing you'll notice, because I'm looking at it on my phone, you realize pretty quickly that basically those icons are way too close to the notch, right? So actually, I'm going to move them down. Okay, and now there are in Sketch. One thing you want to do if you're designing a UI that wants to follow a specific grid, you want to change those values to be 1 and 8 if you're using an 8-pixel grid, or let's say 10 if you're using a 10-pixel grid. Those are the two most common ones. You could have also a completely separate one. In this case, though, from the Canvas tab, I suggest you change that setting right away when you know will make it much easier to duplicate things and make sure everything is aligned correctly. The other thing I suggest is to remove offset duplicate layers and also rename duplicate layers. Uncheck those because otherwise you'll end up with the layer list saying copy, copy, copy every time you duplicate something, and you don't want to do that. Quickly, there's plugins in Sketch you can add to improve your workflow. Some help even with prototyping. I can send the links afterwards to things that you can consider for this hackathon if you want to. You can bring data sets. One thing I mentioned before is that designing with real data is a thing that makes your prototypes already look more realistic, even if you don't have the fanciest transitions. And then once you learn to use these create components, and doesn't have to be for today, you can create an external library to recreate. Now there's a lot of test libraries, so some are not even available there anymore. You can see a lot of things are called test. But basically, you can reuse the component. Everything is a symbol here or a style. You can put in an external document and reuse it really quickly. And some people can work on a library, and some other people can work on the actual product. But you get the benefits of collaborating together and getting the changes from others and not having to redo everything you've done. So somebody can work on the structure and the content. Somebody else can work on the look and feel. So okay, this cat is pretty angry at me, so I'm going to change it. I don't. Okay, so let's say I selected these 4 elements here. You can also just select one element and do Command A, select all. We'll select all the siblings of that element. So that's really useful when you have, let's say, a grid with, let's say, 100 elements. You could go and select here with Command Shift one at a time, or go from the top to the bottom. But once you know that they're all siblings, I can go here and do Command A. So that's huge. And then dragging here, you can change the space. Let's say if I wanted to do overlapping cards for that look and feel, I can do like this. If I want to go to a specific value, and if you hold Shift, you see it's going in increments of 8. That's because it's following the increment that I said before. If I had chosen 10, it would have been incremented by 10. So here, though, one thing I wanted to do, Command A, I want to apply more realistic data. In this case, I have some data sets already created. And I can, so in this case, I could decide to apply cities data. Let's say I wanted to do cities from everywhere instead of cats. And you see now it's applied here. Let's see why I didn't apply here. Maybe I didn't choose something correctly. What am I doing here? I think it might be conflicting with, yeah, so I kind of mixed things up a little bit, so I probably should have not done that. Let me delete this and just create a new one from scratch here. If you see that something like this is looks like locked and I can't change the proportions, it's because there's a lock here. So once you unlock that, you can go freeform. Okay, so now instead of I could still apply an image here. But instead of going through that plugin, I'm just going to look for this. Of course, is a different version of Sketch. I downloaded, so let me see if I can bring up another image. Let's see. Let's say I want to grab this image of New York. You can just click here and then drag it. I could drag it anywhere in Sketch. So let's say here. Okay. And you can keep it in the canvas if you want to keep it for reference or put it in a separate page, or you can just now copy and I can just paste it in here. So if I go here to the fill, whoops, sorry, I click choose image view, select that, and you paste. So now the advantage of an image, as I said before, being set as a fill and not as an image itself, is I can actually add other styles on top of it if I wanted to. I can also determine if I wanted to, how I wanted to work. I wanted, you see in this case, I'm only seeing a tiny portion of it. I can, if I wanted to tile it for creating a special background, I can do that. Usually though, you stick with fill. Fill is the one that will make it easier to design responsive. As you can see, it's giving you what the behavior would be if you were to design a product where, you know, the container of the image needs to change and what a viewport of the image needs to change. So just time check. I know we have still a few minutes, and I want to get to showing you to create connections. So the whole point is creating prototypes. But that's kind of the point here too. Creating a prototype is actually very easy, but it is, and it's kind of the last steps. You can create low fidelity prototypes just to get a sense, and let me do that here. Let's say I wanted to create, let me delete these items. I just want to create a prototype where I can go from this card to this other view. I'm going to rename this and call it detail. And best practice is to actually number those screens. So in a flow, it's very clear to everybody what is the sequence of those screens, if they ever have to be distributed as images or in other ways. But obviously, once you're looking at the canvas, the relationship between screens also tells you what you're looking at. What is the relationship between the sequence? Command Shift G ungroups things. Now I can make this a little taller. And sometimes you want to, in this case, I want to reuse all the elements here. I want to actually detach all contents from the symbol. The reason is, again, because I want to have the same names already here. So I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I'll usually, when you go from a detailed view to, for a list view to a detailed view, you want to show the same content to confirm the user that they're landing in the right place, plus expand on that. Usually contents get bigger, you have more details there too. So I'm going to remove actually the card background. So there's no more mask as if it's expanded there. I can make this taller, let's say, pretend that that's the view I want to do. In this case, I'm going to move these above and I'm going to make them bigger too. So this could have been already a style. I'll make it a style now. Let's say call it 40 and click here to create a style. And the author might even stay the same if I wanted to, just because it's probably going to be something smaller. But then duplicating again, Option Shift. Now I could add some text here. I'm just going to grab now for speed some text. Let's say this is probably, let's say if there's a Wikipedia page. Okay, the reason I could just copy this piece and I'll put it here. It's important to have the realistic text, but also to have realistic length of content. That's totally true for pretty much anything from small labels to large pieces of content. Because if you're designing with the wrong quantity, you design something, oh, I have this beautiful name with this beautiful username and next to each other, and they're like 3 letters each. And then you see in reality when you use actual content that everything blows up. Because names are varied, like people. So it's okay. So let's pretend I have this beautiful piece of content here. I'm not going to spend time laying it out. those properties are same pretty much everywhere. But so from here, I want to be able to create a connection. So pressing W in Sketch, we're going to prototype and say add link. In Sketch, all the shortcuts are listed next to the menu item, like in any Mac app. And you can always change them if you find, you can go into system preference and change those things. But if I were to click here, now the selected element will ask me, where do you want to land on? This is pretty common in prototyping tools. This is how we do it in Sketch though. So I could have selected one item and creating this connection this way, and then create another page for, let's say this is New York, and then let's say I could have Chrome here. Okay, so what I would do, I would go and apply, find an image if I were to do it through Unsplash. Let's say Unsplash, not a random photo, search photo, and say Rome. Now, who knows what we're going to get, but that's why it's useful to do your image research sometimes even upfront, because the tool at the moment gives you random image, but having the site on the side, you'll be able to search those images and just drag whatever you actually want in that context. So from here, I'm going to do, I want the same image here. I can select that, copy here, select and paste, and then I can go here and also paste it in here. So now I have the same image. Consistency, I guess, as I said, is key. If I were to make this taller, because let's pretend I have images of different sizes, I can always go and then select again, Command A, and here click tidy, and now everything is pushed down. Because I want that to push down too, I'm going to do this. Now, so from here, I could connect to this page, and from here, I could connect to this one. I'm going to do press W, do it. The thing I want to do, though, is every time let's pretend that clicking on the logo, I want to go back to the home page. Now I'm putting a connection inside a symbol. That means that everywhere I have that symbol, and let me turn Control F will show the connections I created. So even when I'm not on the artboard, it's selected. If I press W now, I can select Start. And so you see I'm getting all these free connections from this element and this element, all going back to the home page or the start. And I could decide that clicking menu would always go somewhere where I'm showing the menu. This year we'll be adding modals. At the moment you have to create, if you wanted to show the menu, you would have to create a version of the artboard with the menu on top for wherever you want to show those things. So here, just going to apply. How much time we have? How much time do we want to leave to questions?
We're rounding out about 9 minutes left, so I guess you could leave the last 5 or so minutes for questions.
Perfect. Okay, so just create a connection. If I press play, Command P, I can see the prototype, right? The thing I didn't do, I think at some point, I probably must have turned this off. Maybe I did a Command Z. So you see that's gone. So clicking that, making sure that that is on everywhere. You can even select multiple objects and do it. So I did that. Pressing Command P and previewing. You now can see clicking here goes back to the home page. Now home screen. One thing that's important when creating prototypes, make sure you're choosing the right type of transition. If the transition falls outside the conventions already been around for like 15 years, I'd say, at least on mobile design, but maybe not 50. Well, there were, 2008, that's when things started, right? At least, so it's a long time, right? So you want to make sure that if I go from a list view to a detailed view, you probably want to go from right to left. So clicking on these, I want to make sure that the interaction is always right to left. Okay, so now I'm actually going to create, I always right to left. Now, when you're reversing a transition, because you're going back, sorry, when you want to go back, you want to indicate somebody is actually going back, you want to make sure that also the transition sometimes is reversed. It can be faster, but at least it's literally telling people you're now going back to where you came from. And I think that's something that sometimes is missed. You don't want always immediate transitions. Like we have an opportunity to choose instant, but instant can be confusing. If somebody doesn't notice what happened, like now on web, there's more of a concept of loading, if you will, that it introduces a separation between where you're starting from, where you're landing, but also that distinction is also giving away. So, but choosing the right transition is important. If I were to put a modal, I would probably choose a transition where, let's say, clicking here brings up the larger image. Let's say, let's do it like this. Let's say, let's pretend this image gets bigger and Rome completely disappear and this disappear. Like this. I would want to transition from this to this with, let's say, coming from the bottom. So that would simulate, and actually do it this way. Let's pretend we're looking at this image really big. And then tapping again on this, I want to just dismiss and then go back. So again, W to go back here. I can choose not detail. I can also just choose previous artwork. And that will actually take away the choice of transition and just automatically do it. So from here, so one thing I did not mention in Sketch, you might have noticed the prototype before had multiple starting points. Starting points can be defined, are really like a big differentiator in how, compared to other tools, means you can define a very large prototype and define starting point. Let's say you're working on something that requires a landing page, then the user to engage with your content, maybe adding something to the cart, then checking out the cart, then from checking out the cart, signing up, maybe the guest or not. There's a lot of clear steps in this flow. You don't want to have to start the prototype from the beginning all the time. So here, for example, I could decide to make this a starting point. Sorry, there's a prototype. So use as a starting point. You can do it from here, or if I were to click Command, do Command P, you see I have this flag here as well. So I can do it at this level as well. And I could also decide if I want to jump directly to another page, which of course I didn't call. Okay, I'll rename it correctly. Okay, so now I can choose to set this as also at a starting point if I wanted to set that image, or if I wanted to set the detail here. So you can do it for all this. Intentionally, I'm going to do it for all of these. You don't have to, but just so you can see, once you save to cloud, and then hitting Command S, will be creating starting points in cloud. It makes it easier for others in your team to understand what are the key parts of this prototype. They don't have just a blind spot. They don't have just one starting point, and they have to forced to be doing that way. So I know this is very basic design. I tried to show you some of the shortcuts that are less obvious. I left things that are more obvious, like formatting things on the right side, because I think that's pretty intuitive otherwise. If I were to click here and go to cloud, you might be asked to log in, but now you can see start, detail again. That would be Rome, right? And then I have the detail zoom. That means I can click the prototype and jump right in, or I can click from the beginning. If I were to click here on the arrow, I just get the standard prototype. If I go here, I can choose if I want hotspots or not hotspots. The reason why this is important is because if you're doing user testing and your prototype has enough clickable areas, you actually don't want to, you want the hotspots to be disabled. That's disabled as in not visible, not disabled as not clickable. So if I were to copy this and then do open an incognito window and paste the URL, now I can see, sorry, one thing is important too. Yes, I didn't make this document public. You have to, if you want to make it visible to anybody with a link, you just go here under sharing, you choose, instead of no access, you can do view. And so that means anybody you send this link to will be able to see it. In this case, I already copied the URL. I can just sorry, from here, I can copy the URL. When I do this, it will not ask me to log in because now I made the prototype public. And unless you're working on something really, really secret, you probably want to make it public to make it easier to share with all the stakeholders. So again, not a fantastic necessarily prototype, but you can see how it can work in cloud as well. If I were to click here, view artboard, that will allow me actually to provide feedback. to provide feedback to somebody. We'll be adding annotations too. At the moment, you can just add comments. In this case, because I'm not logged in, I cannot add comments. I would have to be logged in to be able to add comments. I see we have 2 minutes left, so I don't know if you have any questions.
Yes, thank you so much for this workshop. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or you can drop them in the chat.
Let me see the chat. And I'll be sending these files just so you can take a look. I'll send also a couple other examples.
I'm going to be placing a, oh, there's one question. Is there a way to hide the orange arrows within the sketch file?
Yes, if you just do Control F, everything disappears. So we have some things under this menu here for creating prototypes. If you go under View, that's where you can also do it this way. So you don't have to remember all the shortcuts I mentioned today. But if you do Show, will also show. The difference is if I turn it off, it will only be visible for the artboard I've chosen. So you know what's coming in and leaving that artboard. In this case, you can see it inbound and outbound. If you do Control F instead, you turn on everything, which is honestly only good when you really want to get an overview of what's and maybe understand what's missing. But otherwise, you want to keep it probably turned off. So you just see the. I wish there was also a way to just turn off altogether. Because sometimes it can be annoying to look at the design like this. So sometimes I like to space my artboards a little more. You can use tidy here to also, and you can drag here if you want to give more space so there's less overlap of the lines if you want. Otherwise, clicking out will also make the, be able to look at everything. But you, any other questions? I know that we are running against time, so.
If there aren't any more questions, I'm pasting a link in the chat right now to our Catalyst virtual swag bag. There's also more information about Sketch, as well as the free trial and more information about Francesco. So thank you so much for leading this workshop. I know I learned a lot personally, so I'll make sure all these resources get to everyone that's participating in Catalyst.
Perfect. Yeah. And you can connect with me pretty much everywhere as FB Moore, and otherwise on LinkedIn, Francesco Bertocci, and the link probably will also give that. So thank you so much. I'd love feedback on the workshop itself too, if you get a chance. So yeah, thank you for watching. Nice to meet you. Nice to see you all.